Good evening, everybody. Can we start the meeting, but on the other, can we adjourn it for 15 minutes as well, please, to give everybody a chance to get back to here? Thank you.
Okay, good evening everybody and welcome to the Place and Economy Environment Scrutiny Committee for 29th January. I apologise for the late start, entirely caused by one of our esteemed HGV drivers blocking the road. Many of us use. So first of all, apologies for absence. Have you got any?
I haven't had any formal
Okay.
apologies, but Councillor Fedorovic is stuck in traffic.
Okay. Declarations of interest. Anybody got anything that's not on the website? Okay. Thank you.
Chair,
Yes,
I'm a
Councillor Pannier.
CPC holder for buses and coaches, but I've not worked in the industry for 5 years, so therefore I've not driven a bus for 5 years for hire and reward, so I think I'm quite clear to carry on in this meeting this evening, but I thought I'd just let you know that in case everybody said he had a minibus company. I was the director of a company many years ago.
Okay, thank you. Anybody asked to speak to the meeting? No? No requests? So we've got the minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of December. Are we all happy they are a true and correct record? I can sign them to that effect. Anything arising from them that anybody wants to raise? No? Okay, thank you. So item 5, Hackney Carriage and private hire licensing policy. So Mr. Smith, you're going to lead us off and defer to Mrs. Wilcox.
Right, thank you. So the report sets out the proposed amendments to be made to the draft Hackney Carriage and private hire licensing policy. So the policy was reviewed so that we could take account of the executive decision in July 2004 to transition to a single Hackney Carriage zone rather than the 4 zones that we currently have. Also to consider representations received from the trade in relation to the policy during the dezoning consultation, and also to reflect upon updated guidance that we've received from the Department for Transport and the Institute of Licensing. So the primary function of the licensing regime is to ensure public safety. And the purpose of the policy is to guide the administration of private hire and Hackney Carriage licensing activities. And the policy aims to strike a balance between the needs of the licence holders and the need to protect the travelling public in accordance with council priorities. So a consultation exercise was undertaken on the draft policy between the 18th of October and the 9th of December. We received 30 consultation responses, which include one consolidated response from the licensing team. The responses are shown in Appendix M, which details the consultation responses along with officer comments to each of these. And the proposed changes as a result of the consultation are shown as track changes in the policy and appendices that you have in the report. In addition to reviewing the policy, the team are also currently reviewing the geographical knowledge test that Hackney Carriage drivers will need to undertake once we have one zone. And this is to make sure that it reflects upon the new updated geography of the North Northamptonshire zone. And we will be very soon consulting on this updated knowledge test, so that will be shared very soon. So the draft policy that you have was put before the Licensing and Appeals Committee on the 14th of January. And at this meeting, the committee determined that they would recommend to Council and the Executive that it be adopted. During the meeting, the committee heard representations from interested parties and considered the consultation responses. And I thought I'd draw your attention to the fact that one of the speakers raised a concern in particular about the door signage and the proposal in the policy to remove the ability to have commercial advertising on the door signs. The concern was raised by one of the private hire companies that spoke, that by removing their ability to have their company name on the vehicle, this could cause confusion to customers who booked a vehicle that they may not know that the correct vehicle has turned up for them. And it was felt that this could increase the risk of unlicensed drivers illegally applying for hire. The current policy allows one small sign on the rear of a vehicle and a sign on the rear door of the vehicles, which could be commercial advertising for their company. The proposed change to remove the ability to have signage on private hire vehicle is to reflect the guidance of the Department for Trade. Their recommendation is that we only have the pre-booking only prescribed signs and the Hackney carriage plates that are on the front and the rear of the vehicle, sorry, private hire plates. And the reason for that is that they say this is to minimise confusion to the travelling public so that they understand the differentiation between a private hire vehicle and a Hackney carriage vehicle. So just for clarity, a Hackney carriage vehicle can be, they can be hailed, you can apply for hire, you can approach them, they can stand in a Hackney carriage rank, whereas a private hire vehicle can't and must be pre-booked. The Department for Transport contend that the approach makes the differentiation between a Hackney carriage vehicle and a private hire vehicle clearer and more obvious, and that enables passengers to have a clear and consistent message that you should only get into a vehicle that has a taxi sign on the roof, unless you've pre-booked a vehicle through a private hire operator and received information from the operator to identify it. Following the consultation, we didn't receive any consultation responses from the trade in relation to this particular requirement around the signage. So as a result, no proposed changes were made to the draft policy that went out that followed from consultation. The concern raised by the trade was, however, echoed by some members of the Licensing and Appeal Committee, so I thought it was worthy to raise that today. A summary of the other proposed changes in the draft policy is set out in paragraphs 5.3 to 5.15 of the report. And I will go through a couple of those. I don't intend to go through them all, but some of them that may perhaps need a little bit more explanation. So in terms of vehicle age, the current policy has a requirement that vehicles that are presented for licensing for the first time must be less than 4 years old. The team received consultation feedback during the dezoning consultation that actually this was causing them financial difficulties, particularly in relation to wheelchair accessible vehicles, because the cost of purchasing a wheelchair accessible vehicle under 4 years old was very high, and that was quite prohibitive. So the proposal in the updated policy is that we remove that 4-year age limit for purpose-built private hire vehicles and Hackney carriage vehicles. And we also remove or change the upper age limit, which is currently 10 years, and we make that 15 years. So that would enable a wheelchair accessible vehicle to be licensed at any age up to a maximum of 15 years. That will hopefully open up the market more to wheelchair accessible vehicles and hopefully increase the number that we have. It's also proposed that we remove the 4-year age limit for first licensing for private hire vehicles that are zero emission or ultra low emission vehicles. That is to encourage the purchase of these vehicles in recognition to their environmental credentials. It's not proposed, however, that we remove or change the upper age limit of 10 years for private hire vehicles unless they're wheelchair accessible, and that we retain the 10 years. And the reason for that is wheelchair compliant vehicles are commercially built vehicles, and it's felt that they'll be able to better withstand the wear and tear of a Hackney carriage vehicle. So in terms of environmental considerations, it's proposed that the current restrictions that we have in the policy in relation to licensing of petrol-only and diesel-owned vehicles is retained. It was felt to us that it was important that we continue to reflect the impact that vehicles have on climate change and air pollution. So we propose retaining them. However, we do propose pushing them back by 5 years, which would mean that all vehicles presented for first licensing from the 1st of January 2030 must be zero emission vehicles. The current policy requirement is from April 2025, so as I say, pushed back 5 years. And also non-zero emission vehicles of any type would not be renewed. Their licence would not be renewed after the 31st of December 2034 and would need to come off the road by that same date. Again, the current policy is December 2030, so we've advised pushing that back 5 years. And that's to reflect feedback we've received from the trade that perhaps the infrastructure isn't quite there, that they would need to make it work effectively, and the ability to purchase these non-zero emission vehicles, particularly for wheelchair accessible vehicles, that is still quite difficult for them. So we propose changing that. This would override the upper age limit I've already mentioned. So if on the 31st of December 2034 a vehicle is less than 10 years old or 15 years old for a Hackney carriage vehicle, the environmental consideration requirement would override the age policy, so they would still have to come off the road at that point. We do propose that we would keep the environmental considerations under review for potential modification at a later point if it was felt to be appropriate to do so. There's one additional proposed change that's not actually included in the draft policy that officers are asking that is added in at this point, and that I've put to yourself for consideration. And it is a non-material change, but the proposed amendment is to the wording of one of the requirements in Appendix G, which is the penalty point system, which is Appendix H of the report, but Appendix G of the policy. And under this penalty point scheme, there is currently already in there a penalty point of 6 points for drivers behaving in an abusive, aggressive, threatening or intimidating manner to any passenger or officer of the council. It is proposed that this is extended, so rather than just referring to passengers and officers of the council or contracted garage, the proposal is that it refers to officers of the council or any third party contracted by the council. So the idea is to widen that remit, and the reason for that is we've had a very recent incident of a driver behaving inappropriately to the company that issued the training for our drivers, and we felt that actually they should be treated in the same way as any other council officer. So it is quite a non-material change, but we do feel that it's right to recognise people acting on behalf of the council. So in addition to review of the policy, officers have also reviewed the Hackney carriage bylaws. So it was necessary to update those because we currently have 4 sets of bylaws referring to the 4 zones. We will need one new set of bylaws to cover the North Northamptonshire Council zone. That has been submitted to the Department for Transport, and we now have provisional approval from them. So as such, the next stage in the approval process is for that to be advertised for a 4-week period. That will begin tomorrow. So from tomorrow, it will be advertised for 4 weeks, and that advertising and consultation period will end on the 1st of March. Those bylaws will then be taken to Council on the 6th of March, where we will request approval and adoption. And should Council approve that, they will then need to be sent back to the Department for Transport for final approval. And because it's important that the bylaws are in place at the same time the zones are introduced, the report does recommend that delegation is given to amend the implementation date, if necessary, to push it back from the 1st of April to a later date if we don't receive approval back from the Department for Transport in time to implement from the 1st of April. And because the 3 are very much interrelated, the proposal is that we would need to implement the draft policy and the new zones and the bylaws all on the same date. So if necessary, the delegated authority would be to delay the implementation date to a date where we have the Department for Transport approval. And finally, a report is to be presented to the Executive on the 13th of February and to Council on the 6th of March, requesting approval of the draft policy that you have in front of you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's a very large piece of work. You've put a lot of effort in, and a very big document, and thank you for all you've done. I've got a couple of questions based on the report rather than the appendices for now. I've got more later on, I'm sure. The first thing, I think we heard before that there's a number of private hire vehicles that are registered elsewhere. I think there was a thing that Worcester or somewhere that was, Wolverhampton was it, somewhere that was, so how are they affected by some of these, particularly the commercial advertising thing? That was the question. I think the timelines that you've got, all the different, are quite complex, and I wonder whether it might be advantageous to have somewhere a diagram, a timeline diagram as part of the policy, so that it can be, so people can sort of have an easy guide, because I'm sure that some of the some of the things will fool some people, and you'll be getting questions. And then there's a thing about dual driver license. So is that where cabs are rented out or shared or between people, and how is the various licensing affected there? And then we've got the colours. Obviously, there's a comment here about where I'm having yellow. So are we saying there's no requirement in future for, apart from not being black, to keeping a standard colour for vehicles? Because obviously they do stand out in whatever. I've got some more, but they can wait.
Right, okay. So in terms of vehicles licensed elsewhere, you're right, there are a significant number of vehicles licensed by Wolverhampton. They license by far the biggest number of vehicles, and it was believed that that was because they have different standards to other local authorities, and at one point it was considered that their standards were perhaps lower or easier to obtain a licence in Wolverhampton, but now they have actually reviewed their conditions, and I don't think it necessarily is the case that their standards are lower. That I think that has changed, but there is a big difference in their prices. Their fees and charges are significantly lower in Wolverhampton than other places, and that is because they benefit from the economies of scale. So they have so many licences that they issue, so it's significantly lower.
Well, it's
So leading on to that. So just to explain that, so in terms of the question, the impact of that. So if a vehicle is licensed by Wolverhampton or any other local authority, as long as the private hire operator licence, the private hire vehicle licence and the private hire driver licence are all issued by the same local authority, then they can actually trade anywhere. So because there is pre-bookings, they could, in theory, still trade in Northamptonshire or anywhere, as long as all three licences were issued by the same authority. So if somebody holds a licence from another local authority, they have to comply with their terms and conditions and their policy. So whatever that local authority requirement is, in terms of vehicle signage, they would need to comply with that. So our signage requirements wouldn't be relevant in that scenario. It would be whatever the signage requirements are of that particular local authority where they obtained the licence.
I mean, you can't be expected to know the terms and conditions of 300 other authorities, and you can't be expected to enforce them either. So
no.
I mean, I can see that being an issue. But anyway, carry on.
So in terms of who would be, so the issuing local authority would still be responsible for enforcing their terms and conditions. But if they trade elsewhere, then would they see that? So it would be perhaps on a complaint basis that would be referred back. So if a particular issue was found, it would have to be referred back to the issuing licensing authority. So in terms of the timeline, were you referring to the implementation timeline that I've talked about? So the fact that it's going to Executive Council?
No, the various dates for vehicles, so that people could maybe say, well, it's an EV, it's not an EV, and it's 10 years old. It's an easy timeline for people. I just thought it would be something to make it clearer. Right,
that's fine, yeah. We can certainly look at that. In terms of the colours, so the current policy is that for private hire vehicles, they can be any colour but not black or yellow. And that is so that to reduce the likelihood of them being confused with a Hackney carriage vehicle. And that is because, as you say, Hackney carriage vehicles in Wellingborough are yellow saloons. The proposal is that we change that to just not being black. On the basis that the yellow saloon vehicles have grandfather rights until 2028, but obviously over time the numbers of those would go down. So it was felt by officers that perhaps we could open the market up and allow yellow, but not black, and not having black does comply again with the Department for Transport guidance. So that is the policy at the moment, that we suggest just sticking to not allowing black private hire vehicles.
Okay, and the other one was about sharing vehicles.
Oh, dual driver licences, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I missed that one. So a dual driver licence is, so we offer a private hire driver licence, a Hackney carriage driver licence, or a dual driver licence, which is both a private hire and a Hackney carriage driver licence. So they would need to comply with the requirement to have the geographical knowledge test requirement in the same way as a Hackney carriage driver would. So they'd need to comply with both sets of conditions.
I got that meant already. Okay, Councillor Pengelly.
Thank you for the report, and I can see there's a lot of work gone into it, and I'm really pleased that on 90% of what's down here, you've seemed to have listened to the trade and listened to the public, because it's the public that are the most important people here, and what they're getting into at night, that they're safe, the drivers are safe, and they're getting from A to B in the best way possible. Few concerns I have, and the first one is I'm just confused by the introduction where you say that policy A, policy 1 or policy 8, what did you say will be suspended till April, the April policy? Yeah. Sorry. Where's the recommendations? What pages? I've got so many papers. Oh, that's it, yeah, sorry.
Chair, is that basically confused?
Delegate authority to postpone planned commencement of the policy of the 1st of April 2025. So is that everything on this paper that's going to be? Yeah.
Right, okay.
So is that everything on this paper?
Yes, so the request is that the planned implementation date is the 1st of April. However, what we will be asking is that delegated authority is given to push back the implementation date of the policy, which is what the paper is in relation to. But we would also be asking for that to be the case for the dezoning and the bylaws, so that all three will be implemented on the same day.
And I'm right in saying that we've been working to some of this policy before today anyway, because what I'm being told is that certain drivers in Corby who couldn't get a cab of a certain age just gave up the cab. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what people have been telling me, because we work into that new strict policy on the age that you're now taking away. So have we been working to that? No? Yeah, that's fine if we haven't.
As far as I'm aware, we should only be
as
today.
far as you're aware, or we have or we haven't, or you don't know.
Well,
Please, yeah.
I'm not aware. Nobody's
Yeah,
brought
yeah, that's
anything to
fine.
my attention that
Yeah.
we're not complying
Yeah,
with the current policy.
That's fine. But you've done brilliant in listening to the trade and the public. On private hire signage, and somebody who gets private hires on a regular basis, I think you're wrong. It's the only thing a few things I think you're wrong. If we had Councillor Wilkes cabs, Councillor Corbyn cab and Councillor Carter cab, 3 different companies come outside the Cube tomorrow, because they all come at the same time when you're leaving a dance, whatever. Which one do you get in? Do you get in the one with, the one with Councillor Wilkes? We know that's Councillor Wilkes cab. If they're just 3 white taxis, you don't know which one to get in. If you see it's got Councillor Wilkes taxis on the side of it, you know it's better security. What we could have is people just driving into town. I always say to my family, make sure they've got the name of the company on the side of it, and make sure it's got a Hackney carriage badge or private hire badge on it. But make sure it's branded with a company name. Then you know you're safe. And if anybody comes into any of the towns with a branded name and they're not them, the taxi drivers know. They phone up and they say, I've seen that Pengelly driving out in a taxi and it's not licensed. So that gives us, our people, security. People know that it's a proper taxi, because I don't know what people's eyes like. I can't see them numbers on the back of the little plates. I can see the big sign that says Wilkes Taxis Limited. I know he's a good driver. I'm going to get in your taxi. So I think that's something I'd ask you to consider and look at again, because it is that security for our public. The knowledge test. What happens to Mark Pengelly, who's 62 years old, that knows Corby around the back of my hand? And then I've got to sit in new knowledge. I've been driving taxis for 40 years. I'm a good taxi driver, steady, never had a complaint against me. And then you tell me I've got to know the knowledge for Kettering and Wellingborough and stuff like that, I lose my job. I don't want to be going to Kettering and Wellingborough. I'll be doing all my work round call because I've always done it. So what will be included in the knowledge test? When are we going to talk to drivers and say, look, do you understand this? Have you got an understanding of it? Will it be, do you know where Irchester is? Do you know where the certain towns are? Because people need to know that. But with sat-navs and things like that these days, it's so much easier if the knowledge test isn't too difficult. I think that people in Kettering should know the Kettering area, drivers in Wellingborough should know the driver, because that's what it's going to be. And so that's something I'd like you to consider going forward on that. The environmental policy. What I'm concerned about is the environmental policy laid down in this is different to the environmental policy laid down in this document that we're coming forward to later. Can you tell me why we're working to two different environmental policies? And I believe that we have to look at after the environment, but we will be doing the same for every single council vehicle that we have, for every single council contractor, saying that if you're doing roofing or you're running a course for us, you're in the course for us, your car's got to be within a certain age if you're driving to our town, in it. Well, that we'd be saying, because we have to be fair to everybody, and it could be deemed that we're not. So I'd just like to know why we've got two different environmental policies coming forward on the same night for vehicles, because they are both different. And the final thing is non-material change. Well, two final things. Non-material changes. I don't like it when things come to the council very, very late on, because when we get told it's only a minor amendment, you could find out in a few months' time, well, Pengelly, you were there and voted for it. Did you not read it beforehand? And I think we should be able to read a document that you put in front of us to agree on before we agree on it. We've not got any paperwork for it. And I've looked and looked and looked. I love bylaws. I think we should be bringing bylaws in for street grass on the sides of streets and things like that. But I can't find the bylaws anywhere. Are they in these papers? Where are they? Because I've looked and looked and looked and looked last night when I was going through it. There's not hundreds of them then, no? I apologise if they're there. I've looked and looked and looked. I couldn't find them last night, but it's probably because... Yeah, brilliant. Apologise if they're there. That's good. So I'll have another good look through them. But yeah, thank you very much. And that's my questions.
Right, okay. Would you like me to?
Yeah, you can carry on.
So in terms of the signage, as I mentioned, we didn't actually have any consultation responses from the trade in relation to that. So the draft that we put out is in compliance with the Department for Transport guidance. So we started with that as a starting point because we are required to consider the Department for Transport guidance, and unless there is a compelling reason to deviate from it, we're expected to comply with it. That's not to say we can't, and if there's a compelling reason, I think we should. So as I say, unfortunately, we didn't have any responses until the Licence and Appeals Committee, and that's why I felt that it was important to bring those tonight, because I do think there's some strong arguments that were brought up on that. The current policy does allow signage. The reason for the difference, the DFT reasoning is they believe the signage on private hire vehicles should be minimal, so that people only get into them if they've pre-booked a vehicle and they know it's coming for them, and they should know what that vehicle is. But I understand what you're saying. If you're in a town centre and there are a number of vehicles, it's easier to see your vehicle if there's a door signage. So I can understand the argument for that, which is why I did want to flag. And if somebody wants to propose an amendment, that could be changed at that point. But obviously, as I say, that was the reason for it, was to, in their mind, to reduce the similarity between a private hire vehicle and a Hackney carriage vehicle. So that was the signage element. Yes, but it is important to know. So if the suggestion were that that was changed in terms of the policy and we allowed door signage, we would need to point out that the legislation doesn't allow certain words such as cab, taxis. So even if an operator does have a name that includes cab, somebody's cab or somebody's taxis, they wouldn't be able to include their private hire operator name. So that would have to still be the case. But for anybody else, then, well, if a name doesn't comply with that, that could.
So when I read the document, I thought you meant you didn't want on it Pengelly's pizzas on the side of it, which you wouldn't want on a private hire. But I didn't think until you said that you're looking at taking the name of the companies off. That's what worried me. But thanks for that.
Yeah, so the DfT guidance is nothing at all other than advanced bookings only. So that was our starting point. And as I say, we didn't deviate from that due to the lack of consultation responses, but we have now received some feedback on that. In terms of the knowledge test, officers have worked on that and have come up with a proposal, and that is imminently going out to the trade. There's a balance. We don't, on the one hand, it's there for a reason. The knowledge test is there for a reason. If somebody gets into a taxi on a rank, they should have a reasonable expectation that the driver knows where they're going. Yet at the same time, as you say, the district is very large, so we don't want to make it overly complex that nobody could pass it, because that doesn't benefit anybody. So it's very much a balance. So it will be going out to consultation, but the balance we've tried to have is that there'll be an expectation that drivers would know certainly landmarks, so they'd be expected to know train stations, cinemas, hospitals, main landmarks like that. But they wouldn't be expected to know every single Warwick Avenue in Raunds, or so it's a balance. So we've tried to have a balance. So we do expect a certain amount of research for drivers to do. So we don't expect them to just walk in a bit for anybody to pass, otherwise what's the point? Yet at the same time, as I say, we don't want too difficult. We hope we've got that right balance, but that's what the consultation is there for, and that's what that will tell us. So we will listen to that consultation and take that on board. But that is coming out very, very soon. In terms of the environmental policy, I'll admit we used our current private hire licensing policy as a starting point, and we just pushed that back 5 years based on the fact that from the starting point of when the policy was written, the implementation date in terms of new vehicles, that was pushed back 5 years, so we just pushed back this 5 years. But I have to admit, we perhaps do need to look at the interrelationship with other council policies again. That's something we could look at and consider, because it has been looked at in terms of what the starting point of this policy in relation to the legislation, and that's why it was changed in that way. So that's something we could absolutely look at. And in terms of the non-material change, well, that's something, as I say, was very much brought about a complaint we received this week. We felt it was an opportunity that the policy hadn't yet been approved, so we felt perhaps it could be something that could be added in, but I apologise. Yeah, in the ideal world, we absolutely wouldn't want to. We just didn't want to miss the opportunity if it was still available to us. So, yeah, apologies, that's not something we would aim to do. And the bylaws, hopefully, you'll see that they are in there. So they are an appendix in the policy.
I think anyway, Councillor Pengelly, we'll be seeing this again at Council, so you have another opportunity then. I apologise, sorry, I just interrupt to say, I've realised one thing I should have said in my rush, that I'm a Director of Shire Community Services who don't offer private hire or private car, but they do take passengers, and so just to confirm that. In terms of the names on the side, I mean, I think there's another issue, which is safeguarding, because a lot of these cabs will pick up school runs, and I think it would be useful just for that aspect, and be able to say exactly which one they got into and make sure. So I think there's another benefit of having the name on the side, as a personal opinion. And I must admit, when I saw that, I was a bit surprised they weren't allowed to do it. Councillor Fedorovich.
Thank you very much, Chair. Also, I just wanted to sincerely apologise for missing the start of your meeting, your report. There was an accident on A45,
43.
33, thank you. But yes, no, thank you for this. Really, really interesting. I agree with the advertising. I was quite shocked to see that, actually. I think, as well, reading the guidance from government being quite flexible, I'd be quite wary of restricting advertising on vehicles, because you've got aspects of safety, but also the fact of I mean, this is their opportunity, like one of their prime opportunities to market themselves as well. So from a marketing background myself, it's kind of, for me, it's their vehicle, it's their car. And I also noted that there wasn't so much, like you say, comments on it in terms of consultation. So I think that might genuinely be because people might not have known about it. I think people probably would have quite strong views about it. But there might be some case to say maybe making it smaller, and obviously there's the disallowing certain words and things, so that seems kind of fair enough. The knowledge test was, I hadn't noted down that, but obviously that was something that came up in previous meetings. But I do think the idea of possibly setting like a priority town for areas, I don't know if that's being considered at all, so people could say I'm a Corby based normally and do the street test just in that area, because I feel like that could work really well. So page 19, there was a little bit about officers do not propose to relax the maximum age limit beyond which the council will not licence private hire vehicles, even when these are ZEV ULEVs, because such vehicles are not built for commercial use. That final bit didn't make sense to me. I don't know if whether it's if they aren't built for commercial use, or if that was just worded strangely. But yes, just some clarity on that line. Page 19 also. So this was the part about delaying it to 2035. I am extremely against this. We already know that how much the government had huge amounts of backlash at moving that deadline back. It really, really hampered industries across the UK and just caused a huge amount of confusion. And I worry that by following suit, we're in the start of a new government at this moment in time. They could at any time change that back, and then this causes us to review this again. They were asked at the time to take that policy back, so I would not be surprised if that is something that is reviewed on a government level in the near future. I do appreciate that obviously this has also come from talking to drivers, but I think in every single industry, everyone wants more help with the transition. Like, that's just the case. But I don't think that should scare us away from being strong on certain policies. This is important. It is something that is going to benefit everybody. But I do hear the point about needing more support with that transition. But again, that's something that we need to look at as a council. We need to be looking to central government for potentially more funding support on that, and almost carrying that feedback through in that sense, rather than necessarily changing the deadline. So yeah, I think, I mean, I don't need to go on about the importance of transport, because I thought I've come onto this into the next bit, but transport across the UK is the #1 cause of emissions. We've got taxis driving around all the time, our buses. It is one of the biggest areas that we can make a big impact and influence as a council, so I would very strongly suggest that we review that. For 5.14, the Hackney Carriage bylaws, removal of separate fares, I recall this was what a lot of drivers were frustrated with at previous meetings, and I didn't know if there was any consultations about that particular section, about sort of combining the 4 legacy zones. But obviously it seems we're pushing forward with that despite the concern, and I just wanted to find out if there was any further consultation done on that. 7.8, I've put here, the climate impact reads a bit like a tick boxing exercise, and that's my honest opinion, because it's, as I've just mentioned, transport and taxis are a huge part of our local emissions, and my honest opinion was, has everybody who's been part of creating this report, have they all done carbon literacy? Do they all understand how important this is, how important transport is, and how high up on the scale of our actions it is? Because that didn't seem to come through in terms of the urgency of and the impact of this. So, sorry, I'm just getting to my last bits. I think the rest of it is actually for our next item, so I think I'll leave that with you, but thank you.
Go on, yeah.
In terms of the advertising, yeah, I think I recognise your concerns, and I think echo what I've already said on that one. In terms of the knowledge test, in terms of your comments about priority towns, that's not something we've looked to do at the moment, because we're looking to move away, because it will be one zone, one Northamptonshire zone, and the whole idea of this is that once somebody is licensed as a Hackney carriage driver, because we'll have one zone, they could pick up from anywhere, and the danger of having a priority is that then if they work elsewhere, they haven't perhaps done the knowledge test in that area. And the aim of the knowledge test is so that wherever they pick up, there's a realistic expectation that they will have a good knowledge of the area, not necessarily a detailed forensic knowledge of that area, but a good knowledge of each area. So at the moment, when it comes out, you'll see the idea is to be a general knowledge of the whole area. The age limit, the bit you wasn't sure about the commercial use, were you referring to the fact that we've not proposed to change the upper age limit for private hire vehicles from 10 years? And if I understand you right, so the reason for that is, so we've extended the age for purpose-built wheelchair accessible vehicles to 15 years on the basis that they tend to be purpose-built commercial type vehicles and built to withstand a lot of use and the wear and tear that you would get. Whereas private hire vehicles that are not wheelchair accessible, they're not necessarily built to that same sturdy standard as a commercial vehicle. So we've proposed to retain the same 10-year age limit that we've currently got and only increase that to 15 years for the wheelchair accessible because of the reason of the commercial. And that's the differentiation of why we've gone for that. Take on board your comments in relation to the changes for 2035, and the reason we did that is because of the consultation feedback we've received. When we went out to consultation on the dezoning, we received a lot of comments that really reflected the policy. So we've taken on board those comments that we received when we produced this draft, and we did receive a number of comments from the trade that they didn't feel like they would be able to meet the standards as they were in the policy, today's policy, because of the availability of electric vehicles. The trade are telling us they struggle, particularly for wheelchair accessible vehicles, to get those vehicles there. The availability isn't there, and those that are is perhaps cost prohibitive. And the feedback that we're receiving from the trade is that they would struggle to meet the deadlines as they currently stood. So that's why the draft proposal was to push that back to allow the market to build up so that by the time we get to that point, we don't push out, because what we don't want to do is lose more and more of our Hackney carriage wheelchair accessible vehicles, because a lot of people obviously rely on wheelchair accessible vehicles, and in some areas there aren't that many anyway. So it's a balance, and that's where we felt the balance was about right, but take on board the comments that you've made. And question about the zones. So there was a consultation in terms of changing the 4 zones to 1 zone, but that was approved by executive in July. So that consultation has gone. The work that came out of that in terms of the geography test, the policy, all of that is obviously what we're working through now, but the consultation in relation to the zones, that decision has been made, so now we're working on how we can implement that. Your comments in relation to the climate impact section, the officer who completed that has done the training, so he obviously felt he'd done that to the best of his ability, and so done that to the best of his ability. He didn't feel like not meant to be a box ticking exercise, but yeah, as I say, that's what he produced, and yeah, as I say, he's done what he could on that. So yeah.
Go ahead.
I also appreciate that it takes a lot of time to write these reports, and by the time you get to that point, you're probably done. So I do heartily appreciate that. It was just a concern. Very quickly, just with regarding the deadline and moving that back, if it's specifically that we are struggling to find EV with wheelchair accessible, I mean, that is a bit more niche, if that makes sense. And I would be more inclined to be more flexible on something very specific like that. But I think at the end of the day, we really need to be talking to them to understand what the challenges are. I mean, it's obviously, if the market's not there in terms of there's not the actual availability of the vehicles, that's one part of it. And we may not have as much influence on that, but actually looking at how we can support them. We've got grants for other things. This is the sort of thing that people are looking to us as a council to consider and bid for potentially if we need to go for central government funding in some respects. But I still would say EV wheelchair is something that I would consider, but I would very much say we need to be sticking to the 2030. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, through the chair. Again, very good document, thank you very much. I would like to, again, back up what you've just said about signage and pick up what you said about safeguarding, because at 5.11 it says they must complete and pass the safeguarding, which is absolutely crucial, so I think we must do that. Quite slightly different, actually, what Councillor Fedorovic is saying. I don't feel we can penalise the taxi trade if the infrastructure isn't there. So I do agree with changing the date, because I would be concerned that they are going to struggle if they're not allowed that slight time change, if we haven't got A, the charging points, B, the facilities, and C, the actual carriages that they need. 4.3, it specifies you're going to keep a look on what kind of vehicles we have on the road and whether it's a balanced fleet. I'm not quite sure how that's going to happen, because surely the taxi drivers, the hackney drivers, have the carriage that they have. So to actually say we haven't got enough wheelchairs or we haven't got enough of this style might be a bit difficult for an officer to actually dictate, if that's not too strong a word. On the knowledge test, we actually did discuss this at the October meeting, and we did say, if I remember rightly, that that was going to be brought back to this particular council meeting for us to discuss it alongside this policy so that we could actually agree that it went with it. But I see at the moment that's been put out to delegated powers. I have looked at it, and it does specify, as you have just rightly said, they've got to know specific points, which I totally agree with. But it's difficult for us to make a decision on whether it balances with this particular policy if we haven't seen what the new knowledge test would be. And it would be interesting, because that was quite a sensitive point about the knowledge test, because it will affect a lot of the drivers. So I'd like to know that we look after these drivers and make sure their livelihood is protected. I've got a few other things, but that's it for now. Thank you.
Right, okay, thank you. Safeguarding signage, I think, echoes obviously a strong thing that's coming out there. Infrastructure, so yes, the feedback we were getting, along with the availability of the vehicles, particularly wheelchair accessible vehicles, we were receiving feedback in terms of the availability of infrastructure and the number of miles that private hire hackney carriage vehicles undertake. They do need a good infrastructure around them to be able to recharge during the day, because potentially they are doing a lot of miles in a day. In terms of balancing the fleet, you're right, it is completely up to a private hire and a hackney carriage vehicle owner what vehicle they buy. All we can do is try and write our policies to encourage certain things, so which is why we've reflected the age policy to perhaps make it easier to purchase hackney carriage vehicles by widening the age policy for those, and for zero emission vehicles, removing the 4-year age limit. So all we can, I think we can try and make it easier to have vehicles that perhaps meet some of our priorities, like wheelchair accessible vehicles and environmentally friendly vehicles, and make it as wide as we can in that regard. And in terms of Hackney carriage, we allow multi-purpose vehicles as adequately adapted, as well as your traditional Hackney cab. So we've done what we can to widen the fleet, but it is always going to be up to an individual driver what vehicle they purchase, as long as it meets the requirement. The knowledge test is being produced. My understanding was that it would be, when it goes out to consultation, the plan is to obviously consult with the trade, but also members of the licensing committee and this committee. So that the plan was to do that as part of the consultation on that, on the test itself. So the plan was to, the policy itself obviously refers to the test, but not the detail of the test. And the detail was to be separately considered and brought up, and that will be subject to consultation, as I say, and we will absolutely take on board responses that we get there.
I think that was it.
I think that was it.
Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Wilkes was next.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Amanda. It's a huge piece of work, and it's been in front of us a number of times. I mean, I feel like I know this one inside out. I am really pleased to say, I know it's been out for a lot of consultation, going back out again for a bit more. It must be one of the policies that's had the most amount of consultation that the council's ever dealt with. And I'm really pleased that we've listened to because there was a real feeling about this from the trade. So I'm glad an awful lot, as has been said, an awful lot of that is reflected in the changes we've got. I don't agree. I understand the reasoning why Councillor Fedorovic would want to change the age and not push it back, but I don't agree with it, because the trade were really clear that the cost of these, and it's all right saying that, you know, there might be grant funding, but these were £100,000 vehicles. So I'm glad that we pushed those specific ones back and given them a bit of leeway, because otherwise we will lose them. And in our admirable pursuit of EV vehicles, we can't kill the industry, and it was fairly clear that we were going to if we weren't supportive of them and relaxed. Zero emission vehicles themselves, it's great that we're making the right move towards it. We've given the trade a fair amount of warning that they're going to have to do it. It's nice to see that. I'm sure if the infrastructure doesn't keep up, doesn't keep pace, then clearly it will end up coming back to council, and that may need to be pushed further. But it's good that we're setting a target, and we do just need the delivery on the infrastructure now. The DFT guidance on the advertising, I do wonder if the reason there was no response back from the consultation was because the consultation talked about commercial advertising, and I do think that the sector thought that means we don't want to be advertising Pengelly's pizzas, but we do want to be advertising Brown's or whatever the taxi company is. I can see how that's going to be really awkward if the branding has got the name cabs or taxi in it. So we'd have to work with the trade on that. But I would wholeheartedly support a change to say that it should be obvious. When a child is coming out of school, they should be able to see the taxi company they're looking for. Yes, we'd have rules, I guess, around the size and where they could be located. And you don't want cars wrapped in huge adverts, but I think the DFT have got it wrong there. Now, having said that, they want to try and differentiate between Hackneys and private hire. That makes perfect sense. And it's one of the reasons why I don't understand why we've moved away from stipulating that Hackney should be black or yellow. I just don't see why we would remove that. In days gone by, we may have said, well, it's restrictive because they've got to try and find a yellow car. But of course, nowadays they would wrap them to make them yellow, I guess. So I think that's the better way of differentiating Hackneys from private, rather than removing the commercial advertising. The non-material amendment, yeah, it's always nice if they come in advance, but we're talking about adding 4 or 5 words that are going to protect people that the council have asked to do work for us. So I have no issue at all with adding that. I think it makes perfect sense. The knowledge test, my colleague is right, it needs to come back to scrutiny, but of course it was always going out to consultation, and we will feed into that through licensing. We'd always said that we didn't want it to be so onerous that people fail, that benefits nobody, the council, the drivers, the operators, the public. But it does need to cover the entire area. We can't have zoned knowledge tests because that's defeating actually what we're trying to achieve, which is, you know, if my daughter gets in a taxi from Corby and wants to go to Kettering, you want to know that driver has got some knowledge of where he's going to. The fear otherwise is a taxi driver might not take them in the first place. My final point, my biggest worry about all of this, unless I've misunderstood it, is that drivers that are licensed elsewhere can drive here. So we can put all of this in place. We can try and strive for EV vehicles. We can try and strive for no advertising, no commercial advertising, small commercial advertising, specific types of vehicles. But if actually the sector said, bugger you, what we're going to do is we're all going to go and get licensed in Wolverhampton and come operate in Northampton. Are we saying that there's nothing we can do about that? Because we couldn't police it, as has been said. We wouldn't even know what their policies were. And why on earth would Wolverhampton try and police it if the taxi drivers are 100 miles away? So did I understand that correctly, that they could just be, they could get licensed anywhere and come and operate here? And if so, do we have any tools to control or prevent that?
Come back on that one. So as I say, that would only relate to private hire vehicles. So Hackney carriage vehicles, if they want to apply for hire, stand at Hackney carriage rank, have to be licensed in Northamptonshire. So would have to comply with our policies. But yes, if a private hire company wants to move and get their licence from another local authority, they can. As I say, the restriction is the triple lock, as they call it, so they have to have the private hire operator, the driver licence and the vehicle licence from that authority. And then they have to comply with the policy of that local authority. But we as Northamptonshire can't require that they're licensed with us. And that is a quirk of the legislation as it currently stands at the moment. All we could do is if we had concerns about particular practices or anything that's happening in our area, then we could obviously report those through to the licensing authority. Or if there was a contravention of the legislation, so if somebody wasn't a licensed driver and they were illegally applying for hire or doing something like that in our district, we could comply with the legislation, take enforcement action. But if it's purely about the policy conditions of another licensing authority, that is outside of our control.
Councillor Pengelly.
I'd like to move the document and thank you for bringing it forward. I think there's a lot in there, with the proviso that we look again and take away the policy on the signage on the side of the doors. I agree with you, what it says is very important, and I think we also have to differentiate, and they don't have top lights as well, which is something that the private hires shouldn't have. I think also we should, going forward, review, and I know you've got a lot to do now, so I'm asking you to do now, but have a review of these taxis coming into the towns, because it's not only Wolverhampton, and I think I was only one at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool this year. I got in a taxi and they were telling me about the Wolverhampton taxis coming up there and what they do and why it's happening here first and foremost. It isn't only Wolverhampton, it's Stansted taxis as well, because they all went on our reverse sort and tender list to get school contracts, so they all got school contracts, and you see vehicles all around Corby parked with Wolverhampton taxis or Stantex, and where we'll get information on how reliable these cabs are is through Volza, when Volza do the school checks. So that's what we could do going forward on saying, look, how many of these are getting stopped and being told that they're not fit for purpose or whatever. So I think that's something we could look at going forward. I know how busy you are now, so I'm asking you to do it now and work on that, and then put pressure on the government to change the legislation on it, because it's something so important. We want to know that our drivers and people in Corby, Kettering, Wellingborough and East North fans are winning school contracts and making money on it, and not somebody who's sitting in office in Wolverhampton. Thank you.
I think we're generally agreed that we prefer that name, but perhaps we could tighten the wording commercial up, because we're all expecting to see the name of the cab company, not Pengelly's Pizzas being advertised.
The best pizza. And one final thing, when we look at the knowledge test, we could have a bit of a quiz, couldn't we? So you know if actually the best.
I mean, in terms of knowledge test, I would expect a driver from Corby to know how to get to Geddington, and a driver from Desborough to know how to get to the urgent care centre here, or Wellingborough to, Nen Park, for instance. They're all across the old borders, but there are main places. Councillor Fedorovich.
Thank you. Just wanted to come back on a couple of those points. Just quickly on the Wolverhampton thing, I wondered if we could make it more obvious. Obviously, the taxis that are licensed by NNC, I have seen like some sort of signage on there. I just wondered if that maybe could be made more prominent, or we could make customers or residents more aware of that, so they can kind of look for our logo somewhere or something like that. That might help. Okay, so I wanted to just come back to the 2030, 2035 thing. I hear the sentiment in the room. I appreciate that. I think also we have a duty to listen to what people have said, and we want to show that they have been listened to. The other thing I also wanted to raise was that this policy, like all policies like this, they are put in place to change the market, to encourage behaviour in a particular way. So the reason why it being there, if we change it to 2035, for instance, our behaviour as NNC will change. We have then 10 years to put the right infrastructure in place. EV infrastructure will help make that happen. If we have 5 years as our own deadline, it will literally change our own behaviour. So we can guarantee it's going to change the market. So when we're talking about there isn't enough vehicles, if they suddenly have 10 years to create those vehicles, or to make sure that the market has that, that will literally change the speed at which the market changes. So, and that's just business. So what I'm going to suggest is that we move it back by 1 year. And the reason why I'm suggesting that is because then we can go back to the taxi driver and say, look, we have listened, we have moved a little bit, we've compromised to a degree. But then it means that the change hasn't been enough. It still actually would be like December of 2030. So we could keep to a reasonable deadline, and then I would suggest that we review this for 5 years' time. I would review it a year out before the date, before it comes into fruition, so that we can see how people have adapted, how the market's adapted, because things are changing in such leaps and bounds in terms of technology, in terms of markets. I genuinely do think that we need to review this close to the time. It's too hard for us to set such a big leap as 5 years. That's absolutely huge. So that would be my proposal, that we move it by 1 year and that we review this 1 or 2 years out from the date. Thank you.
Yeah, I can see the point that if you say something's going to happen in 10 years, people will leave it 9 years before they do anything about it. But I'm not well enough up on the motor industry to know how far they are in terms of being able to supply vehicles, of the right type in a shorter period. I just don't know, so I don't know what the effect would be. Mrs. Wilcox.
I can't pretend to be an expert either, but the feedback I'm getting from the trade was that there just aren't the vehicles currently. And also one thing we do need to consider is that they are a business, so they do need to plan in terms of replacement of their vehicles. So part of the idea of giving them the time is that they can plan their business plan when they replace their vehicles. And the concern is if we don't give them much notice of change, or they work to something and then we change it again, that causes a lot of frustration from people. If they've had to spend money to comply with a more stringent policy now and then it's made more lenient down the road, that causes frustration because perhaps they've spent money that they feel they didn't need to. So that's one thing. Another thing I would be perhaps concerned about is this issue that we've mentioned. People can get their licences from elsewhere who perhaps have less stringent requirements than we do. And my fear is the more stringent we make the policy, there's a risk, and it's a balance. We certainly want, the whole policy is about trying to get that balance right, but if there's always a risk that they go elsewhere to get their licence, as we've mentioned. Hackney carriages, if they want to carry on at a Hackney rank, they do have to get the licence from us. But they will always have to make a decision, do they want a Hackney carriage licence and carry on what they're doing, or they could change to a private hire licence and go get the licence from elsewhere. So I totally understand where you're coming from, but it is just about that balance. It's allowing the trade to plan their business, it's allowing them for the business to be affordable and maintaining the fleet that we have, because the public do rely on Hackney carriage vehicles, and we don't want to push them out of the market and end up with less vehicles. So, yeah, balance.
Okay.
Chair, I fully sympathise with everything you're saying, but we're living in a new world now, and we've seen Donald Trump this week or last week say he's going to say that no more electric cars, he wants petrol and diesel cars built again, and that will force our markets not to build as many electric vehicles. And for the people over there that are presenting soon, it must be a nightmare, because we all know what we want. We all want a cleaner, greener environment, and it's so difficult for us. What will happen is, whoever the government is in the next 5 years, there will be changes coming on, and when they change, then our officers have to react to them changes in the environmental policy for vehicles. Right now, the policy's changed from what we thought it was going to be to what it is now, so we've had to change to go along with that, or we could be challenged all over the place. So I fully understand what you're saying, but it's so difficult for the trade. I know people and I know you said it's not in, people told me it was in, and we were working to this policy, and they were told that their vehicles had ended their life, and they couldn't get one. And they were having to pay £80,000-90,000 at 63 years of age, and they couldn't get a loan on it, and they just gave up the taxis. So this is where we have to protect people's livelihoods as well. It's really important. And I'm not saying we should make that an excuse for not looking after the environment, but we're going by the environmental policy laid down by the government in this country right now, and that's where we are.
Thank you. I wonder if Mr. Trump spoke to Mr. Musk before he said no more electric vehicles, given that it's part of his... I've got a couple more questions. Out of the report, in 5.9, it talks about vehicle testing. I presume that if a vehicle fails, that it has to be taken off the road and it can't be used till it's rebooked. And I just wondered if there was a time limit before the retest. And then 5.15, we've got this penalty point system discussed, which I'm quite pleased to see. I'm be a bit parochial in that, I mean, regularly in Wellingborough I see vehicles, cabs, just parked on the pavement, driver's gone off for a cup of coffee, and pavement's got a double yellow line. I mean, I send Philippa pictures of them, and hopefully we're able to do something about that now, because I'm not sure what we have been doing. But the other thing mentioned is carrying dogs, and assistance dogs mentioned, and it says that cab drivers who have a medical exemption can be excused. However, medical exemption, not the reason we seem to get a lot of problems, both with wheelchairs and more particularly dogs. It's usually religious grounds that they refuse to take them. And that isn't mentioned anywhere, and is, for people with not necessarily assistance dogs, but general dogs, that's been quite a area of complaint, certainly, certainly in Wellingborough. I can't speak for Kettering and Corby. So I don't know whether that, I mean, there are some penalties in here for not following the rules, which are presumably some new penalties. How are we going to enforce those? How strong are we going to be on that? Because obviously, if religious grounds is used, that's a significant barrier.
In terms of the test, the time limit is basically in terms of when the licence expires. So they will have to have passed the test by the date of the licence renewal. So to get a new licence, the car will have had to pass. So if the car fails the garage test and the licence renewal date has passed, then they can't have a new licence. So they must meet all the requirements. So drivers generally would put the car in for a test in advance of the end date so they could get it checked. But if it failed and it was a safety issue, the garage are required to notify us and we will suspend the licence at that point. So any car that we know of that's got a safety issue shouldn't be driving. So that should be currently dealt with by suspension of the licence. And the penalty point system, yeah, so when we've received complaints in the past around parking issues, we as licensing haven't been able to deal with that. So we pass that on to the parking enforcement team for them to deal with under their provisions. The proposal is, however, that we do get a significant number of these types of complaints, and it does perhaps reflect upon the fitness of the driver. So some of them might park up and then go and do their shopping and then come back, leave the vehicle unattended. So the proposal is that would now fit into the penalty point system that we have under the policy. So licensing officers would be able to issue points for that, where we have adequate evidence. That would obviously be based upon the adequacy of the evidence that the officer holds. And in terms of the assistance dogs, for that we are reliant upon the equalities legislation. So the equalities legislation refers to medical exemptions, and that we do require a doctor's certification. So not just somebody saying to us, I have an allergy. We require their doctor to actually say, yes, they shouldn't have to deal with dogs because they have a serious allergy. So we will only issue an exemption on that basis alone, and that's purely down to the legislation. So that's just on the medical side.
So, I mean, the point, how are we going to deal with it? You know, it happens quite regularly that people are refused because of religious grounds.
Refer through to the licensing team, and we will refer them through to the equalities legislation.
Okay.
So as far as I'm aware, they shouldn't be allowed to continue on religious grounds because of the equalities legislation. But I will double check that with licensing officers.
Okay. Councillor Shacklock.
Thanks, Chair. Just one observation and then I've got a concern. Wolverhampton has not got the monopoly on private hire cars coming into the area. Some of us have a Peterborough postcode and we rely heavily on them coming from Peterborough and Cambridgeshire because we can't get them from Northamptonshire. My concern really is over the knowledge, because on the Licensing and Appeals Committee we've asked for it to come back to us. Scrutiny is saying they want it to come back to us. Are we realistically have we realistically got the time for it to come back to us after the consultation?
Sorry, which bit are you talking about to come? We're only asking for the zoning, the knowledge question.
About the knowledge.
Yeah.
So in terms of there will be a consultation on the knowledge test, as we've said. I must admit, I don't think we'd appreciated that there was a desire for it to come back to committee. We were going to include the committee in the consultation and take on board consultation responses. However, if it's a desire of the committee that following the consultation, it then comes back to this committee for final approval, that can of course be done, but it would extend the implementation date. We wouldn't obviously be able to meet the 1st of April implementation date for the new knowledge test, and we would have to consider the impact upon the implementation of the new zones. So would we introduce the zones but introduce the knowledge test later, or would we delay the zones? So that's something that would need further consideration.
I mean, technically it's an executive report or a council report, and it's sort of delegated to us to be consultees rather than, which is what happens with the budget. Councillor Pengelly.
What may be useful is the feedback from that consultation. So if the owners turn around and the public turn around and say, this is absolutely brilliant, we're quite happy with this, then is there any need for it to come back? But if there's 30 or 40 drivers and hundreds of the public outside with placards, then I think we've got to look on it. So it's that balancing act that I'm sure we can trust the chair of the committee to talk to us about it and we can make a decision then. I think that's fair, isn't it?
Okay. Councillor Fedorovich.
Thank you. This is the last time I'll come back on this.
Oh, I've got more.
Okay, cool, that's fine. I mean, I appreciate the points that you were making, Amanda, about the coming back and reviewing things close to the time. I think possibly that would be a good case to do it maybe a couple of years out, maybe then a year away. But my thinking is as we know, things are moving very quickly, and I do genuinely think that our power as a council is not always the fact that we can pay for things or do things ourselves, but it's the influence that we have. We know that. That's a really, really powerful part of it. And this policy is so key. We don't have to move with the government guidelines. We know we don't. That's where they are set. This is our choice. And we have to live with that choice as well. If we make this choice to push it back, and it does change the market for the worse, that's on us then. So the fact is, at the moment, what I'm suggesting by pushing it back a year is that we can be genuine with our local drivers. We can say we have heard you. Like my furthest, I'd probably push that as 2 years as a compromise, but just say we have listened. That's the key part of it. But we also need to try and keep that pressure. We need to keep the pressure on the market, really, and we need to work through our drivers. If we have a longer period, a longer deadline, it'll be longer for those conversations to come out, because there are going to still be problems when we get closer to it as well. So we need to tease those out as soon as possible and try and work through it with our drivers. There will be lots of the market will improve. There will be lots of different funding routes that also come through government and probably through us, and also through things like loans. But we need to support people through this transition. Though pushing it down the road is not going to help. So I would very much strongly suggest 1 year, pushing it back, and maybe 2 years if the room is minded. Thank you.
Okay, well, I haven't heard anybody else come in on that, but I'm sure officers will have a look at it. Can I go now to the actual policy document? A couple of things. As I waded through this, I made a couple of notes and found that sometimes the question I'd asked was sort of answered in another appendix, but I didn't know whether, so perhaps if I suggest it, if you say that that's sufficient, that's fine. But the first thing was in 2.2, could we update the information there, because that's 14 years out of date now. An actual policy, 2.2. Just above the map, it talks about the population, and I would have thought we've got some more up-to-date information than that. Yeah, you're on it. And then in 5.11, by the way, there's a couple of these things that need renumbering, but I'm sure you'll pick them up as we go through. 5.1, it talks about applicants. It doesn't actually say they've got to have a driving licence or to pass the test. Now, it does elsewhere, but it doesn't actually say it there. And in 7.5, it actually doesn't say they have to have a DBS. Oh, it does, again, it does elsewhere, so, but it's in a different appendix, so I didn't know whether it should say it, those couple of things in there or not, whether you feel that what it says elsewhere is sufficient. I don't know. It's just those little things. That's it. So perhaps have a look through and see what you think.
Yeah, it's a balance as to whether you put it in the policy and the appendices or just the appendices. Yeah, I agree. I think in some cases it's a bit a case of very long document, trying not to make it too long. But yeah, I'll absolutely look at that. But
I suppose it has to be comprehensive because it's people's livelihoods, and it has to be, and it may go into judicial situations, so it has to be complete and accurate. So we've got some recommendations that are in 3.1 in the covering paper, and I think to that we've added the recommendation that adverts for the firm itself be considered. So are we happy with those recommendations? And yeah, and obviously we've asked officers to look at that as well, the timescales, but I can understand the difficulty with the uncertainties that there are both in the manufacturing trade and from government. Are we all happy with that? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for a a very considerable piece of work and comprehensive piece of work, and no doubt it's taken a lot of time and effort.
Are we taking a vote at all on the proposal that I put forward, or is that just
Yeah,
going
well,
to be?
yeah, we said that.
Is it going to be?
Nobody else has come in with that, but we've asked officers to look at it.
So it will, just to clarify, so it will be looked at and will be decided by who?
Well, it will come back to council anyway,
Okay,
because this whole policy has to come to council.
sure. I mean,
So
it would be, I would find it helpful to get consensus from the room if 1 or 2 years would be something that would palatable, because at least that can be fed through in the notes. But at the moment, I don't feel like.
Well, I think we've heard from officers and we've heard from Councillor Pengelly as well about the difficulties with it. Councillor Works, did you want to come in? And I'll get Councillor...
Chair, if it helps, I mean, I'm happy to go on record that I wouldn't support it. And simply for a number of reasons. We had to listen to the community, the business community. It's by bringing it forward 4 years or 3 years, we are putting a huge financial burden onto them, because we're only talking about the wheelchair accessible vehicles. If I could understand the argument, if the council was in control of the infrastructure that needed, but I don't believe that bringing it forward 3 years or 1 year is going to force the Chinese manufacturer to make these any quicker or bring them forward to market any quicker, or for Virgin to install more things. I just don't see that it's going to happen. I think our commitment to EV vehicles is admirable and I support it, but I just think it will adversely punish the sector without actually achieving what we want to achieve, because we can't. We're not in control of it. So
I think Mrs Wilcox gave us the risks quite clearly. Mr Candler, you wanted to come in?
It was really just to confirm next steps through you, Chair. So what we will do is we will insert the key comments that have been made by Scrutiny this evening, and that will be a specific paragraph in the executive paper. And obviously that executive paper gets published next Wednesday. And then it will be for Councillor Brackenbury to consider that as the executive lead member, and then how he presents that to the executive on the 13th of February, and indeed then whether it stays in as you suggest, Councillor Fedorovich, or it stays as it's currently written in the report. But that's how we will deal with that, and the other points that have been raised by Scrutiny this evening. So we will put forward all of those comments that have been made and the specifics that have been raised around some of those key items, like the knowledge test and like the advertising on the sides of vehicles. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So we're all happy. Okay, thank you very much. And so we move on to the next item, which is a draft climate change. Actually, sorry, yeah, I mean, it's happy to go. No, there is one question I was going to ask Mr Waterworth when he sits there about taxes. Yeah. So before we start the items, have the people who monitor George Street and Gloucester Place cameras got details of the taxis that operate in the other zones, or just in those zones? And if not, they might need them.
I would double check. However, typically they would be given the list of all the licensed vehicles and include the registration plates within the cameras to make sure that they don't inadvertently get a ticket. And obviously, if there was an incident where one did get a ticket, we have a route to ensure that that is appropriately considered and cancelled if need be.
Yeah. No, I just worried, if a Kettering cab went through the Gloucester Place one, then is their number registered? Because at the moment it might not be. I don't know.
Yeah, I can
it's
double check.
Just a thought
for
the future.
I can double check for you.
Okay, we have the draft climate change strategy. Are you introducing it, Ms. Waterworth, or are you passing the
I will gladly introduce the report briefly for the committee. So I'm pleased to be presenting the draft climate change strategy for North Northants. That strategy sits in the context of another number of other strategies and commitments, such as our carbon management plan, the Big 50 work in terms of thinking about North Northants by 2050, and studies such as the North Northants to net zero work, as well as a plethora of other strategies that are referenced throughout the document. So this strategy draws on all those pieces of work to focus on how the Council can support North Northants as an area to address the effects of climate change over the next 5 years. It also sets out our vision for North Northants to transition to net zero by 2050. Oh, sorry, my computer has just... Wonderful, we're back online. So as you can see, the strategy is broken down into 6 key areas of importance to focus on, and they've been developed as part of the consideration of the climate challenges that North Northants has, as well as in discussion with different sectors that have fed into the development of the strategy. As you can see, we also went out to public consultation last September, and you can see the feedback received as part of an appendix, and you can also see in the report where we've taken on board some of that feedback we've received and factored that in. So that's at 7.5.5 of the report in terms of where we've considered that feedback. In terms of next steps, the key is to develop the roadmap to net zero action plan, and that will be the practical steps that we're looking to take to realise our vision to achieve the net zero by 2050 ambition. And it's really important that as part of that, we look at how we're going to develop that action plan with bringing sectors together to work together on the challenges and solutions collaboratively, noting that we as the Council don't have all the answers for those challenges, but we are best placed to help bring those different parties together to talk about those. So in terms of next steps, the strategy is going to be considered by the Executive on the 13th of February. Obviously, we would welcome comments and feedback from the committee on the strategy and the objectives proposed. And I'm also joined by a plethora of colleagues in the climate team and also electric places that have supported us with putting the strategy together that can help with any questions. Also joined by Councillor Harrison, who'd also like to make some remarks to the report.
Yes, welcome to the new role.
Well, thank you. Obviously, I've only been in the role for a couple of weeks, so be kind to me. I'd just like to say a few things. It's interestingly, as an executive member, to pick up a policy, a strategy, and be given it, almost complete, is quite interesting because it means that I'm looking at it pretty much through the same eyes as you are. And that's unusual from previously being involved in building these things from the ground up. So I'd like to just say thank you actually to Electric Places and our fantastic officer team here for all the work they've done, because I'm sure you'll agree that this is a great policy. I know you're going to have comments, but this is a great policy and a really important part of our suite of policies that's going to take us beyond just us as a council, but us as a community, a North Northamptonshire community, getting to net zero by 2050. And it would be hugely remiss of me if I didn't say at this point, I'd like to say a huge thank you to Councillor Harriet Pentland, because she has steered so much of this work. And I feel really guilty that it is my face and my name on this policy, because of course Councillor Pentland has done so much hard work on this and has been absolutely brilliant. So from my perspective, picking this up and just simply reading through the strategy, what really struck me is how well put together it is. So it takes us through step by step the process of developing the policy, the national context, the local context, very specifically. And, Councillor Fedorowicz, you were talking about transport being our biggest challenge, and it's in there in black and white. It really shows that here, not just nationally, but here in North Northamptonshire, maybe even particularly here in North Northamptonshire because of our geography, it's a really vital part of us getting to changing our habits in order to bring climate change down, to stop it. So Going through there, it then breaks it down into the separate areas. And what I really like is the fact that this policy doesn't just set out the problems, it starts to talk about what some of the solutions are going to be, what work we can do as a council, what we're saying we're going to do. I love the fact that any resident can pick this document up and there's a little section there saying, here's some ideas of what you can do, changes you can make. I think that's really helpful because individuals sometimes feel like this is a problem that's far too big for them individually and don't really know where to start and don't know what to do. So I think it's really good that that's in there. And then in terms of our wider community, the people we're going to be working with, businesses, the farming community and so on, there's some really helpful ideas there. Now, I know it's not going to have everything, and this is a document that it's not finite. There's lots of different things that people are going to want to be doing in the future, and this is going to be a strategy that will be constantly being updated and improved. And as we find what works and what needs more work, this strategy will change with that. So I think it's a really, really good start. And as I say, I found it, as somebody coming to it brand new, easy to read, easy to understand. And I think you could pick it up, you could flick to a section and say, well, what are we thinking we might do here? And you'll be able to find that quite easily. So thank you for, casting your eyes over it, and really keen to hear what you've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I agree. It's a very attractive and well put together document, and again, a lot of work. Any other officers wanted to lead in with anything before we open the questions? No? Right. Okay. Go on.
Just super quickly, obviously. So this sits above our carbon management plan for the council. So the carbon management plan that members will be familiar with, and we did a recent annual report on that. That's what we will do as a council. Just to be clear, this is us stepping into that leadership void and suggesting what should be done across Northamptonshire as a place. Obviously, we can't tell people what to do, but this is very much about where we see a collective effort can make some significant impact. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Pengelly.
Yeah, Chair, I have to leave shortly. I have explained before you arrived to Councillor Harrison the reason behind it. I have tried to stay a bit longer, and I did want to have a say on this tonight. I think it's an absolutely brilliant document. It's easy to read, easy to get to. You can see where you want to do in each area. On transport and on homes, you've got a department on an area on living and whatever. What worries me is that are we as a council adopting these policies? We're going out buying some brand new housing, putting on our housing stock. Are we ensuring that we as a council are sticking to the policies that you're laying down here? Because I think it's really important that we do that, and the properties that we take on board now are fit for purpose, and we don't have to retrofit in 5, 6 or 7 years' time. And if they're new builds and they're not, then don't buy them. It's just as simple as that. The other issue I've got, and it's what we want is more and more people driving electric vehicles. And on the new estates, we're seeing electric vehicle charging points getting put in. What we're seeing on Inner Corby and Inner Kettering and Inner Wellingborough is that you can't put these in because you have to go all the highways, and the council aren't allowing it. And there are schemes in other towns where they do, and you just use the Highways Act where you can drop curbs in, which is very easy to do. I'm dealing with a constituent who's got no legs, and he's got an electric car, and what he was told by the council was to get a garage half a mile away to park his car in. He's got an electric car, it's a DDA car, to park outside his house, but he can't charge it up because he can't get permission to put the electric charger across. So that's something I think that is important that we look at, because we want all our homes as possible to have electric charging points. I think that's something Helen would love, isn't it? To see North Northampton leading the way on it. So I think we've got to look at what other local authorities are doing to say, look, let's bring this in as best practice for North Northampton. But I think it's a brilliant document, and I'd just like you to look at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, I know that a couple of years ago we looked at something from, I think it was Oxford, wasn't it, where they could lay a track in the pavement with and you could take the lead out. It was very expensive, but I imagine after time it will come down. Other operators will come in, but Ian may be more up to date than me.
Yeah, so thank you, Chair. Yeah, there's probably about a dozen different providers now. We saw an early one, which Oxford Direct Services solution, eGully. So I think there's 29 trials running across the country, and we're looking at the different trials, looking at the operators, looking at the kind of the financial models, the maintenance issues, inspections, compliance. Because if if you're dropping a cable in, you want to make sure that people are hiding the cable. It's not kind of a trip hazard. So we're very mindful of that. So it's something we're looking at with highways to see what role it can play in terms of a solution for people, where it is potentially the only solution that would work. If you can contact me on that one directly, so I can look into that one. Is that okay to come back to you on that one?
I have to say, one of the things that frustrates me are the design codes, and why we can't have design codes that mean that new builds have to have solar panels, both warehouses and houses. I do not know. That should have happened years ago. I know the builders will say it put costs on, but the long-term benefits are great.
To sell pipes, gas, electric pipes, gas and water pipes into industry for going around these new urban developments. And you're seeing now new urban developments going up and big yellow pipes going the way around it, and we're saying we're getting rid of gas. It just doesn't make sense. Get rid of gas now. No more urban developments allowed to have gas housing. Simple.
Okay, Mr. Waterworth wants to come in, and then Councillor Wilkes.
Thank you, Chair. It was just on the point around council housing and other premises. I think the challenge there is that those properties that are aspiring to those B and A EPC ratings are not necessarily out there en masse. Housing builders are not necessarily building to those standards. So it's difficult for us to say we're going to do it and go out and buy it when the product isn't necessarily there. But clearly we can influence it in terms of that. And also the guidance around EPC requirements is only going to go one way, and we're trying to think about that for our own stock, not just housing but commercial and others, in terms of how because you can do it. You can build these homes to that standard, but at the moment housing builders aren't doing that. So it's how we can influence that by our own stock in terms of what we're buying, but also if we're going out and having to buy properties for children's homes and other things, we clearly have to do that and get on with that because there's a service need. But it's what we can do to retrofit those properties and make them more efficient. And that's how we can live and breathe and set that example.
And Mr. Waterworth won't be surprised to hear me say that we should do more to get EV charging points in our car parks and leisure centres and other places that we own. Hopefully there's a procurement exercise going on.
Indeed, and Ian's team are leading on that piece of work at the moment, and hopefully that comes up to positive fruition, Councillor Lorman.
So it's a conversation we've had before. Councillor Wilkes, did you want?
Thank you, Chair. A really good document. A really good, not only a good document for us all to see here, but of course it is for, like you say, the public. It's one of those documents where you think the public could. I don't say that about many things that the council produce, but this is one of the things that the public could pick up and really understand, find the bits that they're interested in. What I would like to see in it is that is us put more pressure on our own planning departments, planning policy. So we talk in here about, and there was lots of feedback from consultation, as you would expect. We should be putting more pressure on planning policy to try and compel developers to put solar panels on. It should be on car park roofs, it should be on warehouse roofs, it should be on house roofs. So I know there isn't a national policy, but we can create that. Now, I'm sure that's going to have a knock-on effect, and some developers are going to say, well, we're not coming to Northampton because we can't afford to do it. Well, don't come then. But I think we should be, and that is something we could do here. We could change the local plan. We are at the right stage to do it as well. And just really put that pressure on. As much as I'm all for EV charging, clearly I am, both Helen and I both have Teslas. So I'm all for that. But it's daft having the electric that's just coming from the grid, which is being produced by coal or gas or whatever. So it makes absolute sense to have solar and then store it in batteries. And we can't do it, but we could compel the developers to it.
Councillor Coleman.
Thank you. Right. Yeah, I totally agree. It is easy to read. Two very simple things. Waste. Throughout the county, there isn't the same procedure. So you actually find out, like in Rushden, we're very good. We've been doing food waste for years. My daughter's in Barton Seagrave. No food waste. It's a very simple thing, but it's a huge thing when you actually look at what must go to landfill. So I think it's something as a council we need to look at that. So that's one thing. Planning policy had written down about, following through on that and actually implementing things like that. The other thing, water flooding and that sort of thing, I think we need to put more pressure on the water suppliers like Anglia Water. We have just suffered in Rushden a horrendous time because we've had repairs going on near Rushden Lakes. And that's going to cause a huge impact. The more infrastructure that you put in, the more needs for the waters, for the sewage and everything else, you're going to get more flooding, you're going to get more damage, and we need to look at that for the future. A lot of us are living in towns with Victorian sewage systems, and I do think that needs to look at, and again, perhaps that can be in planning policy to ensure that the suitable infrastructure is put in to stop anything happening. That's my three main points at the moment. Thank you.
Before you answer on that, I'll pick up on the waste thing as well, because when I read the cover report, one thing that I thought was that there's not much mention of getting people to convert from residual waste to recycling. So I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that goes in the residual bins that could and should go in the recycling, and maybe some part of the education could be pointed at that, because that will certainly help us. I know my neighbour has an overflowing black in our area, and I could go a month without even putting it out. So there's a complete difference. Mr. Waterford, do you want to go?
If that's okay, Chair, just to pick up on a couple of those points, and certainly we can also weave in the recycling point and education. So food waste, that is coming. That's 2027. So my colleagues in the waste team are working on that. We're looking to get the vehicles procured and all that kind of stuff. So it is coming in terms of that consistent approach across North Northants. The point around utilities is really important, actually, and I'd be really keen that all the utility companies are involved in those conversations and those groups, because they are part of the solution in terms of some of the challenges we've got. Particularly thinking, you mentioned Anglian Water and flooding, grid connections with the power networks and things like that. It's really important that we get them around the table to talk about some of these things, particularly when businesses are coming forward saying, we want to put solar panels on, we want to do this, we want wind turbines, but we can't get the grid connection, or we need that to stack it, and that's part of our role in terms of as a convener and bringing people together to explore. I suppose the other bit is linking in some of that flooding points and works around that in things like the local nature recovery strategy, which is coming to next month's scrutiny. So I don't want to spoil any surprises of what that says, obviously, but whilst they're two different strategies, they do talk to each other. It's really important that they link up. So it's a lot of the climate challenges can be addressed through some of the nature challenges. So it's ensuring that the two talk to each other.
Actually, in terms of flooding, I wonder whether the zones are ever reassessed, and whether zone 1, 2, 3, 4 they are still actually right and accurate for what's actually happening. Councillor Fedorowicz, did you want to come in? Yeah.
Did, thank you. I thought I'd let everyone get in there first. Yeah, exactly. No, obviously I have loads to say. I have tried to trim it down slightly, but it's brilliant. It's a really good report. I appreciate all the work that's gone into it. I think the priorities are really on the money. The only thing, obviously, is the big. It's very much about the what. It's not really about the how. We really need the how. And obviously, we'll come back to that in the later part. Obviously, the roadmap is due to come in the next year. I would hugely challenge that. I appreciate that it's going to take time to work with partners, etc., to firm up those sorts of actions. Not all the actions will necessarily be within the council, but we should be setting a tight deadline on this. Also, we should already be working off a carbon. We've got a carbon management plan. We should already have a roadmap that we're working off. So why it should take an entire year to create a plan, that is just a little worry for me. I would love to see a month. I would like to see that, get something firmed up, know what we're doing for that year, and then you can obviously, should be a working plan, a working document, but we should have a fairly good idea of what we should be doing within that time. So that is just one of the first big things. Also, the fact that this is part of the Big 50 work. So this is obviously a really key part of that, but we already need to be looking at what do we want to be looking at in 2030. Work backwards from there. We're the ones setting the vision. We're the ones that should be trying to see where we can't cover that vision, and then building some of those actions into our potential plan, and then going out in the next year, for instance, with partners and working out where they could potentially fill that gap. We obviously can't do everything, but I do think that first month or so, that needs to be the key time where we fill those gaps, where we work out where we do need to do that convening work, and then build out that richer roadmap, if you like, over maybe a longer period of time. I'll try and go through in like chronological order with the rest of this, but actually I was going to pick up on the new builds. I mean, obviously, I think the big thing, so much can be tied into planning policy and our local plan. I think it's really key. We all want to see how that's going to be translated, because there's so much of it. You've got building on floodplains, you've got solar on houses, on warehouses, all of these things, but I think I would really like to understand how that's going to be translated into the process and how it will be reviewed. And I will very briefly say, just on the nature recovery strategy, as that's just cropped up, grass verges is mentioned in the timeline so late on. I was so shocked by that. I think it was 80% of our grass verges or something will be by a certain date, and I just thought, this is something so within our control, so something that people have also asked me about countless times, and I've genuinely gone back to them to say, I don't know why we can't do this. It's something that Kia have said and promised that we will be doing, and I know that it's probably happening slowly, but at the end of the day, it's less work if you don't have to mow them as frequently. I know there's obviously complications with that in terms of like mowing rotors. I've talked to the grounds team about it. However, you identify those as NNC, and then you pass that over to town and parish councils who are dying to take on some of these spaces. They really are dying to like fundraise and put like seed down, all of that sort of stuff. It doesn't all have to be on us, but that is something that we could identify those verges this year, and there's no reason why we can't do it, and I don't see why this has to be sort of such a far down the line thing. Okay, so I'll go through. 5.41, energy was recognised as a big priority. I put here, I would like to see us be a bit more ambitious. We talk about having more solar on our buildings, and we do have a section where we talk about getting renewables on as many buildings as possible. Just say, we will put them on every possible building. Like, if we can come out and say that, then obviously it's within feasibility and things, but if we're not ambitious with that, it's not about money actually, because there's schemes like the Big Solar Co-op who could install on any commercial building. So I just want us to have that ambition to say that's what we want, that's the vision. We want it on all council buildings. It might not necessarily happen because of X, Y, Z, but let's explore what that looks like. So 5.4.2, brilliant to see that we've recognised like the energy connectivity issues that we've evidently got locally. So this is within the energy connectors. What I'm not seeing here, and obviously this will be more in the how, which is how we will resolve that. I'd have liked to have seen something in the document to say that we've thought about how, because we have to. Obviously, we're talking about working with developers to find solutions to that connectivity issues, but I would like to see something in there about community energy. We know that the government is going to be putting more funding in this year into community energy. So I would like to see that in there to say, okay, we might not be able to solve everything, but we will empower our community to be more resilient. We'll look at community spaces. We'll work with even our local communities to set up community energy infrastructure, or groups that can bid for some of that funding that maybe we cannot. So community energy is one big part of it, and that sort of like localized batteries, looking at that sort of thing. We know that that's going to be, the connectivity is an issue, so I think if we know what the solutions are, or some of the things that we want to explore, we should probably just be a bit more explicit about that. Okay, so 5.5.2, this was about the greenways. So I wanted to flag this because I have a big query, and I guess this has been a query at the back of my mind for some times, but which is, are local greenways how people get to work? And I don't know if that is something that I could get the answer to today. I don't know, but from people that I've spoken to, people are more concerned about urban cycleways. They're more concerned about they can't get to town. They can't. Most people actually will generally live in the area that they work in. They want to travel to work that way. So, and the fact also that we don't, within the area when we're talking about cycling, we don't commit to fulfill our LC whips in the next 5 years. And I appreciate that we're waiting for funding, other things like that, but we at least need to set the vision there. There's no mention of them. We probably need a bid writer to help with that, funding created. That I would very much say that we need to just put something in there about the LC whips and our ambition to get there with them, because otherwise we're just, we're not showing our commitment, in my opinion. So
we have got an LC whip coming to the next meeting.
Yes.
When released those hands ones.
Yeah, I know.
One's gone through, hasn't it? And one's still being done.
Yeah. It is good, and it's obviously an ongoing conversation, but I think it is so key to people. Like we've got those plans, we've made some really good progress with it, so we should talk about that, and we should say our ambition in the next 5 years is to fulfill them all, ideally, but like let's talk about them. Promote, so 5.6.1, I've got here, promoting local food production and consumption can also help reduce our carbon footprint and ultimately enhance food security. I think this is really a great and valuable point. I mean, I guess I'm hoping this will come through more in the roadmap and the how. But some of the things that other councils have done that are very, very successful are like creating more micro food production areas. Also things like allotments. I think I mentioned this at a later point. We know we've got a backlog of allotments. People want them, but they can't get them. We were the ones that stood in the way of some Morsley allotments getting created, which again is a shame. Putting some commitment behind, realising that we need to allow people to be more food resilient. That I think I would like to see in there, like creating additional allotments or gifting or working with town councils to create more of these, the green patches type thing. That's what people really, really need for improving resilience. Right, so I've kind of covered that. So 6.7.1, it's essential that we continue to develop green local skills and that businesses are supported in their journey to decarbonise. Again, I think it would be nice to mention some of the things. Intutech was already mentioned, which was great because they're obviously doing some really exciting things. But also we're looking to potentially subsidise some courses or work with local educational facilities. I think it's just worth us kind of shouting about that. This is like one of those documents we can also do that into. We also, just the point before in the document is about farmers. And I think, again, explaining a little bit more about that. And because if people are reading this, they also kind of want to know how this is going to happen or how we're going to support farmers. I think helping them diversify income. I've seen farms that rent space to the community for growing, helping them with renewables, all of these sorts of things I think could be really just more tangible of how we're actually going to support them. And I'll come to waste. So again, things like electrifying our fleet, we've already started. I would like to see that in there, some sort of commitment to not necessarily electrifying our fleet, but moving to clean vehicles. So that might be hydrogen powered as well. And trying to appreciate we're now harmonising with the food waste, which is really, really good. But actually thinking about how where we transport our waste to. I don't see much vision in this document in terms of trying to create jobs locally for dealing with our waste, like for instance anaerobic digestion sites or blatty composting sites. They're really exciting vessels, green jobs as well, and could be obviously create a lot of new jobs locally and reduce the amount of miles that our waste has to travel just to be dealt with. And I think, yeah, it's keen for us to start with our vision of like where we want to be with that. So 6.2, okay, that's about the year and how long it's going to take to do our roadmap. I've covered that. So, and I honestly just think the feedback from people were brilliant. I'd love to see how we're going to incorporate that in. I just think there were so many fantastic ideas. I also would like to see Section 106 mentioned and how this can be used to help climate goals, if that's possible. And there was a long list of some things that people raised that was missing. Really brilliant. I think I had a couple just to add to that list as well. So businesses generally, from me talking to them, have said that they feel that there's no communication from the council. And that's almost like it feels like a bit of an expectation that they just need more support. So there's kind of that expectation that they need that communication and support from the council. It's just a reflection to take away and to think about how we could do that. It might be that we could do that through town and parish councils, and that we could disseminate information out, and that we could kind of put the onus more on hyper-localised areas. But I'm just feeding in that the businesses feel, I think, quite on their own at the moment, and that most of them are just kind of finding their own way. People and businesses obviously need help financially with implementing solutions, so I'm not going to go into that. Mitigation, I think, was something that I was expecting to see as a headline, actually. Things with flood work, things with farmers, community resilience. People within the consultation were really worried. I was really surprised about that. They were exceptionally worried about the heat. They were literally worried about the high temperatures. And I think from seeing summers where some people in my ward are elderly people, and we've had our team go out and check on people because they are unable to keep cool. This is the sort of the mitigation stuff that we have to think about to a degree. It might not necessarily all be on us, but I guess it's thinking about what we could potentially do to help people, whether that be if people aren't in a livable condition, basically. Flood work is obviously in the wider remit of what we're looking at anyway, but I just didn't see that coming through as much as I would have liked. I think that's probably enough. I think I'll pause. Thank you.
Quite a bit to go there. Councillor Harrison, you'd like to?
Thanks. I was prepared, Emily, that you're going to have a lot of ideas. And of course, we're all impatient to get to net zero in as quick amount of time as possible. And I think the way to view this strategy is to see it as, so we've got the carbon management plan, which is very specifically about what we, North Northants Council, are going to do, but we're really aware that, of course, there are a lot of emissions, a lot of carbon that's outside of our direct control. And so it's really important for us to have that ability to influence the whole of North Northamptonshire. And so in terms of your, and I completely, I absolutely understand your impatience, but your impatience over the sort of year of developing that plan with the wider community. I think the point is that if we sat down and in a month we said, right, businesses have got to do this, and farmers have got to do that, and then we came up with this plan, you wouldn't get buy-in from the community. We have to do it with them. I mean, you'll know how important it is to work with people if you want to make change. So consultation, co-production. If we try to impose a plan upon the whole community that we're saying, right, you've got to do, I think that's where we start to lose people. So it's really important that that plan stands the test of time so that by 2050 we can be net zero in North Northamptonshire. I really, so that's from my perspective, we've got lots of policies within the council already, as you know, which are directly aimed at us taking action right here, right now, and we already are, and we're continuing to do that. So it's, and I think Big 50 is absolutely where that work takes place, because we already have the vehicle for having those conversations, and bringing people around the table, having work streams on different elements of that. So, you know, in terms of energy infrastructure, we can't do that alone. Yes, we need to have, we need to encourage that. We need to be behind the production of a plan there, but we can't do it on our own. And if we came up with a policy without any partners involved in that, I'm not sure we'd be able to get it off the ground. So I think, I wouldn't want you to think that we're going to sit around for a year doing absolutely nothing, because we already are doing a lot, and we're going to continue to keep pushing. And I'm sure many parts of the community are already doing lots, but we just got to get a comprehensive plan that we can get buy-in from all the really important people, the industries, for example, who are going to help to make that improvement.
It's important people understand what you want to do and why you want to do it before you go ahead. Is there any other officer who wants to answer any of the things, Councillor Vodorovich?
I'm certainly not going to try and answer every point, but thank you for the feedback. It is appreciated. And if you want to send us anything afterwards in terms of anything you want answering specifically, we're more than happy to do that, as usual. So in terms of the community energy point, so a lot of that will be picked up through the local area energy plans. Sitting here now, I can't tell you exactly what that looks like, but that is about engaging with communities, local leaders around looking at energy in their area and how you can reduce that carbon. So it's certainly on the radar in terms of being part of the plan. The couple of bits in terms of decarbonisation of our fleet and management of waste is more picked up by the carbon management plan in terms of those commitments. But to give you reassurance, it is on the agenda. So our next major fleet renewal is 2027. So clearly we're working and thinking about that now, because we'd have to procure that in 2026. And we're looking to bring something back a bit later this year, so probably middle of the year, that looks at decarbonisation, what are the options and for our fleet. And invariably electric won't work for every vehicle in terms of need, routes and the tonnage it has to carry. So that is a piece of work that's already started and happening, and will come through in terms of looking for feedback and input from members in due course. And I completely get the point around businesses feeling, who do I go to ask, and that's something that we can hopefully pick up through some of this work with engaging with different sectors. And we had the pleasure of visiting a local business earlier this week, a number of our colleagues, and and we heard some of that in terms of they want to engage, but they don't know who to ask, and I think we can help some of that, particularly through Ian's wider team in terms of economic development, through some of the planning contacts. There's ways that we can help and try and steer people and just make connections for them about who to talk to get help with different things. So pick up that point and recognise it, and I think we can improve that.
I think Mrs. Geary.
Thank you, Jonathan. Just to build on what Jonathan has said, in regard to community energy, we are working with some of the parish councils who are looking at their own community energy projects. For example, Nassington. I'm on their working group for their district heating project that they're working on. So it is something that we are looking at and that we are trying to be actively involved with. The other thing I wanted to highlight is the green skills comment you made about advertising the available courses. So we do have a sustainability Facebook page now, which I have been pushing all of that information out as much as it's coming in. And we've also are developing a resource hub, which we intend to either add on to the existing website or potentially a microsite. We haven't worked out those logistics yet. But that resource hub will be like a one-stop shop for residents and businesses to come to get more information about everything in regards to retrofitting, training opportunities, business, grant opportunities for businesses and community groups. So we're trying to pull all of that together currently. So.
You want to be careful. There's 136 parishes and towns. We'll be very busy. I don't think we ever actually got a further discussion about the waste and education and so on, which a couple of us have raised. I mean, I remember, and I've raised this before, that in county council days we used to have a vehicle that was a waste education, was set up to do that and go and visit schools and other premises. I think it went to the west, and I think it is no longer, from what I hear. But I mean, something like that, if budgets could be found, I'm sure would be beneficial. I don't know if somebody wants to comment. Mr. Candler's been nodding.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have a comment about the vehicle, unfortunately, but I do know that the waste team does do quite a bit of social media in regards to educational campaigns. And where they have issues with houses not using the bins correctly, I know that they have protocol where they go out and visit those houses and try to introduce appropriate methods in terms of the ways that the bin should be used. So the teams do those things, but perhaps we could do it on a larger scale, certainly.
I mean, there's countless opportunities, not just schools, but I mean, the council ran 4 summer days at the main towns, and something could have been there. There's loads of shows and fairs and carnivals that go on. Opportunities outside of school to take something like that to promote what we do and what people can do in a nice atmosphere. Did you want to come back?
Briefly, thank you for the replies and comments. Also, I never actually got to congratulate you, Councillor. Yeah, very, very happy to see you in the role. But yes, I mean, also just to clarify in terms of what I was saying about the 1 year, what I really am talking about there is you would obviously never go and just tell businesses this is the plan, this is what to do, but we often create a rough plan and then go out and talk to people and flesh it out. It's basically a consultation, isn't it? Ongoing sort of thing. But yes, I think what I'm trying to get at is if we don't be ambitious with a vision and create where we want to go, when we're same as what we're talking about with 2050, like the big 50, we kind of have an idea of like the big picture. And we can see where we want to be in 2030 and what we can and can't do. And I think we should be ambitious as to build in all of the things in that roadmap of what people are saying, all of these very good ideas, and have that in our roadmap, even if we can't necessarily do it. And then go out to people and say, we need help with these, like put them in red, whatever, the things that we can't do, and sort of make it part of that conversation so it can be really, really transparent, because I think we can then build in some of those fantastic ideas, especially the things that we can't necessarily do, but be transparent about that. I have a couple of other quick bits as well that I didn't get to, just about carbon sequestration was mentioned, and I guess this comes back into planning, and someone mentioned in a consultation response about trees and our existing green infrastructure. I feel like that's talked about all the time, but it's somehow not translated into planning. Protecting, we're setting these targets of us planting trees, but we're not protecting trees, not enough. And people have said this over and over and over. So I guess it's just a case of better protection for green infrastructure and existing tree coverage. That just needs to be so key. And then yes, I've mentioned all of those bits. I thought that the transport was a really interesting one, and I wondered I didn't know if it's something that would be explored in terms of giving town and parish councils more support to find transport solutions that work for them, just because every place is so different. And I thought the minibus higher, I don't know, flag it down system, I can't remember what it was called. That was really interesting to see in there, and that we've got that in the pipeline. But also you've got places like Rushton that have their own community-run minibuses, and they serve themselves very well. So it might be the case that we could even support people to purchase their own electric minibuses and empower them to find their own transport solutions. That might also take some of the pressure off us and give people exactly what they want as well. Okay, this is my last point. You'll be glad to know. So at least 80% of households with off-street parking will within 250 metres of a public EV charging point by the end of 2029. This goal, I appreciate that it's probably been set from a smart goal, because I've seen previous papers on this where we've showcased that we've managed to do things like this within a certain amount of radius of people, that they've got these infrastructure there. However, from being an EV owner myself, I've seen an explosion of the fast chargers in industrial areas. So you'll, like in the Kettering Park Hotel and that sort of industrial estate there, you'll see Telford Way, they have them, and all over the country. I've gone to the weirdest parts of industrial estates, but businesses can diversify their income by having EV chargers, but they can do a lot of the work for us. But often they might not be thinking about it because they're probably in their silos of just thinking business as usual or doing their own things. But I think having those fast chargers is way more important. Quality over quantity for me is like such a thing with EV chargers. And also looking at landowners where it would make sense. One example in Kettering would be there's the sort of big Tesco's. There's always parking there. And across the way, there's sort of like B&Q area. Again, massive car park, always parking. And you always have these things of, even we were talking about taxi drivers earlier today, they need the fast chargers. They don't need the 22 kilowatt ones, or sort of even 50 kilowatt is now getting a bit like old. So it's those fast chargers. And if we can work with landowners, business owners to encourage them down this route and just make it really easy for them, like this is the way to do it, I would love to see that as part of the strategy. But yes, thank you.
I think one of the reasons that you see them in industrial estates is because they have three-phase electricity, so which makes it easier. I mean, it's quite interesting. I flew to Dortmund last month, and the person who picked me up drove straight across the road to McDonald's, and there was a 300 kilowatt charger there, a batch of 300 kilowatt chargers. And you had a choice, actually. So it was quite revealing. And in about 10 minutes, he'd done enough for the journey home, which was stunning. One of the things that never seems to appear interesting is communication and how we're going to deliver it and talk to people. And I'd like to see something more about how we're going to communicate this to people, how we're going to get people's buy-in, what methods we're going to use. The other thing, it always amazes me that we can tell, I mean, Councillor Wilkes will know because he chairs planning, we can tell people they can't use more than 105 litres of water. We can tell them we can insist they have a cycle rack, but we can't insist they have solar panels. It just seems daft, but there we go. But the other thing is, I wonder if this can be used as a forerunner. Obviously, we've got biodiversity net gain come in. And can this be a useful tool to identify ways, because obviously that's going to be something that people are going to need in planning again, identify ways to help developers, builders, whoever they are, find ways, and people building bypasses, to find some offset. Councillor Harrison, you're going to...
I put my hand up when I think I know something, and I hope I do. So I think your last point about planning and nature recovery, the local nature recovery strategy will very much be dovetailing in with both this and the local plan that's coming forward, and identifying those places where we can get biodiversity net gain, and working with the planning system. And I think, Councillor Fedorowicz, you also talked about the planning system, and as you work through this document, you do see there's so much tie-in, and that's probably, it's one of the areas that we perhaps have the most amount of leverage and influence. And that's, I think, where we can show a bit of muscle, and that's, obviously we need to develop that and make sure that we really make the most of where we can. In the document it does talk about carrots and sticks, sort of, and as a council we do have some of those powers, and I think that's probably one of the most powerful areas that we will probably have as a council to get some of this to happen. So you're absolutely right, and Councillor Lorman, I agree with you both on that.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any questions? Any officer who's not contributed to Bolton? You've been sitting there, and you're the author of the report, the approver of the report.
I'll just come back on a couple of points. I think really helpful questions, challenges. I think a lot of them demonstrate the fact that we can't do it alone. You know, we need to work with local communities. Nicole mentioned Nassington as one we've started to work with. We've worked with working with lots of businesses. Jonathan mentioned one that we visited. We've visited three in the last week, very different types of businesses, but working with them to bring on this kind of journey, because that's what it is, isn't it? And picking up the pace on this journey is kind of vital. Helpful comments around business engagement. We work with Nick and Peter and Tim, who's not here, trying to engage businesses through a series of kind of webinars, lending toolkits, helping them to develop decarbonisation plans. It is difficult to engage with businesses, so we will be asking town and parish councils to kind of help us do that kind of outreach. But the businesses we do work with are really positive about this, and through things, for example, UKSPF funding, we've been able to help lots of businesses, lots of community projects as well, get off the ground in terms of electric minibuses, charging points, solar, so and as well in terms of green skills, working with Glamis to deliver green skills programs in the community. So we're delivering a lot with people in this community, because it's a real USP for North Northants, this agenda and the quality environment that we have. We can obviously kind of do more. Also the climate change conferences, which we run at the end of the year, spotlight the fantastic work that's happening. So each year we have a kind of conference online, and there's never a shortage of innovative projects which are happening. It's not the council. This is community sector, businesses, farmers who are doing brilliant work. So thank you for your comments, really helpful.
If there's a desire to be leaders, we have to tell people. And I mean, there were a couple of companies named in here as projects I'd never heard of. And I hope that these companies are talking to each other as well, because they'll all have ideas that can be translated across. So I go back to communication again. Anything else, anybody? If not, Mr. Candler.
Just a minor point. Obviously, I think that the points have been really well made. And if it would be helpful, obviously the local plan is in development at the moment, and that does create a structure to drive forward quite a lot of what we've been discussing. So if it would be helpful to bring, as part of the forward plan, an update on the local plan, but maybe with a specific theme around how we're driving the sustainability agenda in North Northamptonshire, that may be welcomed by members of the committee. So it's an offer that we can bring that forward as part of the forward plan going forward.
Excellent. So we've got some recommendations. I mean, just to note the report, which I think we all congratulate the authors on a splendid piece of work. And I think there's been a number of recommendations which you've noted to take forward. So Clark will have been noting them. I don't think there's any specific I haven't heard. So we're all happy with the recommendations. Okay, thank you, everybody. We don't have work planned because this is an additional meeting, and there's not long to go. But, we will note things that might be for the next administrations and scrutiny to look at